We are
Good.
on.
All right, well, welcome everybody. It's Thursday, March 30th, 2023, and I have the pleasure here to be joined by Andres Pineda. And Andres is one of our alumni from FIU Landscape Architecture, graduated in 2012, and fast forward, and he is today Senior Landscape and Environmental Specialist at Pineda. We're going to hear and learn a whole lot about Andres' arc, but suffice it to say that one of the most interesting things is how I think you describe what you do as a storyteller, as a placemaker, as an explorer of white space. I want to know more about what that means, and about integrating solutions. Your company, Pineda, is involved, it has a very unique history dating back to almost 100 years, I want to say. It began its roots in cars and automotive design. And today, you do transportation, you do spaces, you do environments, you do so many other things. And it's connected to this, I think, very powerful artistic vision. It's also concept-driven, as we've talked. And it is something that occupies a really unique space, I think, definitely, in design. So I'd like to begin by asking you about that, because the other thing that's really remarkable to me is that you, as a landscape architecture student, alum, practitioner, you were asked to basically, as I understand it, to kind of start this, be a part of this environmental sort of division, right? In a company that has so much history. So let's start maybe first by, I gave my quick overview, but tell us a little bit about Pineda and Alfa Romeo, Ferrari, on and on.
Yeah, definitely. So we're what we call, or we like to call ourselves a 360 design house. We're a company where, we've done so much market research and we're kind of unique in the world. And we're unique because we target various segments within, which are automotive design, transportation design, industrial design, in this case now landscape architecture, urban design, interior design, architecture, and I might be missing some nautical design, so boats as well. No? And we do one-off designs, so basically if somebody's very interested in something that we design, very prestigious clients, then we're able to do these very unique designs. No? So it's within the company. What makes it interesting is that history and that what we call cross-pollination within the company. That basically what that means is that we're designing, let's say architecture tower, but when we also have sort of the feedback of the industrial design, we also have the feedback of the interior design, and these visions, right, because they're completely different scales, allows us to get a result which typically in other studios you have one-way vision, right? In this case we have different lenses of how to view things. No? So that kind of gives a general overview of the company as a whole. When you talk about the cars, we're, if I'm not wrong with the number, I believe it's 93 years of history that we have, and we began with Ferraris, designing with Ferraris. And then within that, we've touched Alfa Romeo, we've touched BMW, and a whole bunch of different other brands that we are currently working on. Recently, we designed a hybrid, then the most powerful horsepower electric car. It has 1,800 horsepower, which is crazy. We did actually an event here in Wynwood. So all these aspects, from the interior design of a car, which is a completely different world, to the interior design of a home, where we do private residences, all the way to mixed-use communities, all the way to mixed-use housing. All these things kind of in one way or another result in the type of products that you might see here, which this is a very, very, very slimmed down portfolio of what we've been working in now. If you guys go to the website, you'll see all the things that we do. It kind of gives you an encompassing view of what the company is able to achieve.
Why do you think it's important to hold on to that design at all those scales? What are some of the pluses and minuses, would you say?
I think one of the pluses is definitely when you look at a space, sometimes the intention of what you believe the space should be gets lost in the product or the result of it, right? So for example, we're designing this room, and per se, from a concept, we begin talking about, we want this room to be well-being. Let's talk about well-being. We want it to be sustainable. We want it to be accommodating and comforting, right? But at the end of the day, when you construct it, you look at the space, not this room specific, I'm talking generic, you might look at the space, but it's void, right? And it doesn't necessarily complement those aspects of what the concept is. So when you're able to tie in these other disciplines that really focus at a smaller scale, somebody might look at that column and say, hey, that column, because of the sharp edges, might actually be dangerous, right? Because if you have little kids running around, typically at homes, you don't have any sharp edges, you have round edges. And at the end of the day, that drives more from a visual and a feel. It's all about how we feel. That's essentially what the company is about, and why I mentioned storytelling, of how you feel within the space. Now, what makes it complex, per se, by having all these disciplines, is that sometimes there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right? And in certain projects, sometimes that's not necessary. In other projects, they are. And then there's this thing, like you mentioned, that we have a lot of sophistication in regards to how we present ourselves, because at the end of the day, that's what makes this company, that's what makes Pineda unique, the way we present ourselves, the way we tell a story. Because at the end of the day, we're all storytellers, and we live and breathe by it, right? So I'll touch upon that a little bit further, which I think it's an interesting topic, which is also part of what I wrote. And it goes more towards the marketing aspect of things, but we'll put that on hold.
And give us a sense of the types of clients, let's say, that approach you. They approach Pineda, I think, with this idea that that story or that brand, has something to offer that other places that perhaps are more about taking something from a design to a build, like what kind of clients, do you come across in the work that you do?
So our main words are innovation, purity, and within that, that's essentially most of our clients are looking at that, the innovation and purity that we could give to the product. Many of the clients, and I've worked on both areas. I've worked on the industrial design side of things. I worked also on the architecture side of things, and I worked also in the landscape architecture side of things. And the clients vary depending on your needs. At the end of the day, what the brand gives them is value, right? Because of the history and everything that it entails. And the type of clients that come is all the way from related, that many have heard of, Swire, the developer. So basically, everybody who's building Brickle here. But at the same time, very high-end clienteles, which some don't even like to be mentioned because it's extremely private. So many of those projects you will never see, or they're actually out in the public. And developers that really want to create a difference and an impact in their market. One of the biggest developers that we have, Brazil, is one of the biggest markets that we have actually. So Cirela and Pascualoto are one of the top clients that we have, that we've developed maybe over 7 different projects with them. And they're kind of speckled throughout, to tell you the truth. Mexico is a huge target. So everything, Yucatan, Merida, there's a lot of projects that we're developing there. In Brazil, as I mentioned, now Panama, you'll see some of the titles there, but those are the type of clients that we're working with. Somebody who wants to show something unique.
Mm-hmm. And I'll move on from that historic connection, but I'm curious if you feel that the roots in automotive design, is that something that the company has transcended, and is it moving away from that into these new sectors, into these new?
I think it's needed, and we have, but we've kept a lot of the things that make automotive what it is. Let me kind of give you an explanation of it. design, we want to create an emotion behind it, right? So another example, I'll use this because these are the crucial or the really nice, interesting things that are being mentioned. You said, you know, when we arrived to Career Fair, we had these pencils within the packaging. The packaging is made out of recycled tire. Not many people know this, but it's the effect that it gives when you receive it, right? It's the effect that, it's the same effect that you get when you hop into your Ferrari. You guys have Ferrari? Your Ferrari? Or you, no, jokes aside, when you hop into a new car, right? You go to the dealer, you hop into it. There's something about that experience that maybe some of us had the chance to do it, and you feel good, right? It's something you can't necessarily explain, but it's something that's felt, right? So it's not necessarily about the design of the car itself. It's more about how do you export, how do you extract that and apply it to all these different disciplines to try to convey the same experience that you're getting, right? Of course, what we're taking out of automotive design is our what we've learned from production, right? So module design is something that we use a lot. A lot of parametric design, which also is you're not necessarily taking. You could take the production line of a car and really apply it to architecture and make you think forward, because construction in one way or another for architecture is years behind, while construction for automotive is a completely different world, right? So the question is, you know, we're talking about innovation. How can we begin? And now I know that I'm going to a little bit of a tangent here, but the fact is, how can you innovate to the future in the projects that you begin to design? How do you design for them? Where now you're not only designing a product, but you're also talking to the guy in construction and telling him, hey guys, we need to change the way that we are building. We need to begin adapting to new methods. We need to be, you know, because at the end of the day, we also talk about sustainability, which that is a word that everybody has its own definition, but with us, I'll touch that in a second, is more about this sort of idea of performance of sustainability, how you make things faster, how do you make things with less cost, right? So within that entail, that's where we bring this aspect of automotive into these new worlds, right? Also the surfaces, we love playing with surfaces. Many of these things you will see there. That's also driven from the automotive design or the masquerade, which is what they used to, it's really beautiful. They used to use wood to be able to make these surfaces. So part of that is actually things that you could see being used in Zaha Hadid's work in downtown. That's when these surfaces are being created.
You know, part of I think the idea of emotion in design is it's very much about an individual connection, right? This kind of very personal attachment to something. And I wonder, when you jump scales into landscape architecture, that becomes more of a collective experience. It's the individual connection and power, but multiplied and cross-referenced. You know, you reach these scales of community and urbanism. And I wonder how you feel that translates. You know, how, as you start to do, and I'm sure when you began at Pininfarina and you started the division or this focus on landscape, there has to be a switch in going from that individual, beautiful experience of being in, you know, in the driver's seat, and suddenly being out in an environment like the one we're seeing.
Correct.
How did you approach that? How did you?
So I think part of the history in previous firms that I work at has really helped me or allowed me to make that process. And I don't know if that's part of the question that you're going to ask me next or not, but I'll just dive into it. I'll just dive into it right now, and to be able to answer you that question. When I began working for a landscape designer. No, I'm a landscape architect. He's not. Again, he's kind of off the books, but he has designed pretty much all of Star Island. No, his name is Harry Nelson. He also designed the Versace. What is a restaurant? And he was very meticulous in regards to his approach to design. He really taught me a lot, you know? And this was sort of my entry to this sort of luxury world, or whatever we want to call it, no? But within this idea of really thinking about a space that serves an individual, but also serves a larger group, right? And so because right now I'm sitting here, but at the end of the day, you know, I could have a place to contemplate it, but at the same time, how do I take this space and create a space where I'm able to share, to try to have that same feeling, right? So in order to kind of cross those borders, the idea is you are sitting in this car, per se, for the sake of the example, and you are feeling this rush, you are feeling this sort of control that you have and this sort of emotion. And the question is, well, what do you need to be able to transfer now, not only as one single person, but also share it as a group where everybody is having, one of the ideas is not necessarily that everybody has the same effect, but at least everybody's able to share something that's worth talking about, you know? And what's interesting now that I just talk about this is that part of my thesis was that, no, with Gianna. So now you made me kind of make those links, right?
We're bringing it back.
Yeah. Really, really interesting. So within that, I think that it kind of expresses sort of how do I go, or that moment where I began thinking, okay, you have these very small spaces in a garden. How do you make these spaces just as comfortable at larger scales, right? If you're talking about urbanism, when you're talking about public parks, what at the end of the day, we're simple beings. At the end of the day, you know, we think we really need more than what we need, but at the end of the day, you know, as long as we have shelter, food, the basics, we're pretty much content, right? So within, not to generalize, but within any type of design that you do that has to do with the exterior in this case, right? If you are able to provide that, you kind of put a little more oomph to it. Now in this case, that's where the surface is, that's where the visual kind of comes in. Then it plays a big role in regards to how the type of product that you're delivering. We actually don't play with corners. We, within the company, is one of the things that we don't play with much. When they're needed, they're needed. But in reality, I don't know if much of the students use Rhino. You know, when you do blend curve, there's the G3, G4. That's essentially curvatures that automotive design uses.
So tell us a little bit about kind of like, why was it that you know, decided to pursue, why landscape architecture? If you can go back to that moment when you decided, you know, I'm going to try this out.
I like to joke around. It was like Newton, you know, the apple fell on my head sort of scenario. No? It all started. Let's talk about. It all started with the architecture, right? My mom is an artist. She paints. She does all these things, and you know, people say that as I was being born, essentially all those things were being transferred into me, right? And we go towards the spirituality of things, right? But after I began high school, I began doing graphic design. I went to a magnet school where the last 2 years we had to pick sort of like a course, a technical course. It was a technical school, magnet school. And I decided to go into graphic design, and part of that program we had to do for the end project, we had to design something in 3D. And I decided to design the house, my house at the moment. And I fell in love with the idea of visualizing, not necessarily the architecture, but visualizing the space, you know, and being able to kind of rotate, look at things from different angles that typically, when things aren't created, you were not able to see. You know? It's like kind of the white space, you know, you're kind of exploring, you're giving a piece of paper in the question, if I tell you do anything with it, most people get stuck, right, because you're not given parameters or anything like that. But I love that. I love that there's no parameters. I love that you can do anything with it, you know? And when I arrived to FIU, it was a long process. It was a long process because all these things kind of led me to picking or ending up in landscape architecture. I initially applied it to architecture, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that. because at the moment, landscape architecture was not known. It was actually the second year program that I arrived in. And architecture already had too many architecture students. And I've always asked myself, like, do I want to be one more, right? Do I want to go into that field being one more? And I remember somebody said, I don't know if it was you, Roberto, or John or something, where they said, you know, landscape architecture is good. It could potentially be the next great thing, you know? And my dad has love for plants. So I think all these things that surrounded me ended up saying, what could go wrong? Let's go for it, no? And it was one of those spontaneous decisions that one day I woke up, I was like, hey, let's apply for landscape architecture. And you know, I fell in love with it. I really, really enjoyed it. That's my non-straight line to landscape architecture.
The origin story.
Yeah.
So you describe and you talk about the white space, you know, and how you write it, and you just mentioned it. Dig into that a little bit. What do you mean? What's you know, why is that an important concept?
Yeah, I think it allows you to play. Let me see, how do I better explain this? Many of our projects begin with a piece of land that hasn't developed absolutely anything. There has never been anything there. So essentially that becomes a white space. And the question is very similar to studio, where, or back then in studio, I don't know if things have changed, but it's, you know, give me a concept, right? And you really need to begin looking around your surroundings and trying to understand what really could help or make part of that environment, right? But you're not giving any type of parameters. The parameters that you're giving is, hey, we need a tower that needs X amount of stories high, and the rest is just kind of open playing field, right? So that white space becomes, when sometimes it becomes this sort of, as I mentioned, this sort of problematic, then you begin kind of doing, again, studio work, SWOT, right? The strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and you take that and you kind of build something out of nothing. It's very feral sometimes, right? It kind of comes and goes, but it's really, like as you say, it's one of these things that is very personal. Sometimes you feel it's right, and I think we all feel what's right in design and what's wrong up to a certain point, right? Of course, you have different people that surround you, that while you do any type of studies, it kind of begins guiding you and telling you, okay, well, you're not going to place this here because then it would contextually it won't make any sense, right? So it's essentially that you're playing with that idea of this sort of openness, but at the same time, you're playing with your surroundings and you're just kind of plastering all these things into this white space and trying to make something out of it. I don't know if that explains it.
No, yeah. So let's pursue that a little bit. I mean, you're from Colombia. You are currently partly in Colombia, in Peru,
Correct.
Miami, right? You're involved. You're doing a lot of work in Brazil, and it strikes me that all of those places are anything but blank, right? And so I want to hear you speak a little bit about how you feel that identity, you know, that your background, which I've known you for a long time, and I know you're very, you know, proud of that, rightfully in a good way. How does that influence what you do? You know, how you think about design?
Correct. So one of the things that definitely always gets me is the plant selection, for sure. You know, I remember I used to, and I still do, of course, you know, look up to the type of environments and landscapes that Rain and Jungle creates, right? That look very natural, that look like they form part of the environment, they form part of there. And all of that has to do with how I was raised. You know, part of my childhood was half and half in the city, but also we had a farm. And the farm hosted all these plants and these vegetations. And my dad is a person who talks to plants, sings to plants, you know? So there's this idea that if you do that, the plants always grow beautifully. And essentially, yeah, in the farm, all the plants were incredible. So you would see, you type in a picture of orchid and it shows you this majestic flower, but you go buy it at Home Depot, it's not that majestic flower, but in the farm it was that majestic flower, because of all of these things. So that background of the tropical, it was a coffee farm. So, the terraces, all these sort of things have influenced. Of course, right now, when I look at it, I always seek to look at these spaces that made me feel comfortable. And for the most part, where not everybody, but for the most part, people go on vacation to these spaces to try to see something different. And the question is, how do you bring this and apply it to circumstances that maybe they don't necessarily take form, but also adapt to the environment. So that's important.
And do you sense that approach changes how you design in these different environments?
Yes, definitely. I mean, topography is something that we know affects a lot. Also, the different zones, right? What we like to do though is, so part of the company is, well, big work that we do is mostly conceptual design, and then we go into we don't necessarily touch design and build, but what we do is that we always partner, right, with others. So what I like to do regarding sort of like plant design is we have a concept, right, that maybe, of course, we're not experts in everywhere that we go because you're kind of moving around in every different climate cycle, etc. But we have a very good vision of how we want the space to feel. But that doesn't mean that we, for example, let's talk about, we have a project in I can't mention that one. We have a project, let's say in Jordan, right? And I'm not a plant expert for Jordan, but I have a very good vision of what I want that space and that feel to be. So then the landscape architect from Jordan sees it, we get together and we have a conversation. It's like, hey, this is the vision that we want, this is what we want to give. And from his expertise, he extracts that and is able to apply it to his end result or end design, right? To kind of guide you guys a little bit more into that, is that essentially the client comes to us, they either have an architect already on board, a registered architect on board, or they don't have a registered architect on board. Let's say they do. So what we do is that we get together with the registered architect. They tell us, hey, if things have been developed, of course we already have these sort of parameters set up. But if things are not, then essentially is a blank canvas, right? And we design. And then we have these sort of back and forth conversations with the architect based on the regulations and everything for the county, because we don't necessarily spend time on that at the moment unless it's required, right? They take this design and they modify it, they apply it based on what their needs are. In this case, going back to the landscape architecture, essentially works like that, right? So the important in this case is the storytelling, the vision that we have, and then overviewing what we call art direction towards the end of the project is understanding and ensuring that our concept, our vision is being equally adapted and applied to the final result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So that initial seed, that vision, right, which you develop and then you adapt and you collaborate with others to realize. How would you describe the origin of those concepts? Where do the concepts come from? Where does the vision get formed? How does that happen?
We don't have it there, no. There's this project. Where we did a competition for the Istanbul airport tower. I don't know if anybody has seen it, and it's a competition that was with Hadid, all these really incredible studios. And what we did was basically look at the culture and what is emblematic of Istanbul in this case, and what Istanbul and its public are proud of, let's say, right? So we found that the tulip was something that was extremely important to them.
The what?
The tulip,
Okay.
right? The shape of the tulip. So then we begin looking at the tulip and we begin kind of extracting some of the lines. And we begin extracting some of, let's say, that beauty that it has. And then the question is, how do you modify it? How do you apply that to an actual structure to make it functional, right? So that's where the tower ends up coming, the design of this tower ends up coming out of, which is basically a tulip. Of course, it's an abstraction or interpolation of that, no? But that's one of the good examples that I could give you in regards of how we capture these contexts or these concepts that they're not necessarily born out of thin air. They're actually very tied to an identity. And right now, actually, Istanbul, we learned a couple of weeks ago that it has become sort of the icon to represent Istanbul, this tower. So of course, we're very proud of it, but I think apart from that pride is just, which I think it's part of that. I'm a great believer that you should not be able to take your project, drop it somewhere else, and it fits in perfect. It shouldn't, right? Because then that means, I mean, we could have an argument about that, or a conversation about that, but then where's the real essence behind the importance of the surroundings and the context that you're given?
So do you think that the research and the analysis is that like primordial? Is that essential? Like, how do you use the words in the company research as part of this? Is that, do you consider that? And if so, what form does that take? Do you go to the site? Do you talk to folks on the ground? How does that process work?
Correct. I think it varies depending on the client, also depending on the budgets that we have available. Some of the projects that we have, for example, I'll kind of go across the board to kind of give you an understanding of how these things work. In industrial design, we had this project for Cisco, systems company, where this is pre-pandemic. We're talking about this 7 years ago, where people no longer wanted to go into offices, right? So the question is, how do we create this third space? And the question is, well, how do we even begin to tackle this, right? So within that scenario, we actually have groups of researchers where we do actual questions to the general public. We do questions to schools, we do questions to the people.
Within Pininfarina, or?
No, this becomes an external, with Pininfarina takes part of it, but we hire external companies that help us with this research.
Yeah.
Because we always try to grab experts, the best experts within the field, right? But we're always there, of course, to learn in certain scenarios, no? In other scenarios, we're the ones that actually do the data analysis. So of course, nowadays we have a lot of tools, right? Where you have